Hey, welcome to Knock the Door, a podcast about squatting in free spaces. Come in and join our conversation.
Squat time!
Vermin, welcome to Knock the Door. I'm very happy to have you here as part of, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Catu squat community.
Yes, completely right.
We're going to speak about what your community is like. How do you relate to it? How do you relate to squatting? Maybe debunk a few assumptions over what the practice is and what it involves. Also, what it could bring to, let's be dreamy, but society at large, but at least to the way cities are built.
Yeah.
But before doing that, I would like you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me. My name is Vermin. As you said, I squat at Catu is the name of our squat. I've lived there for a few months now. I organize some events there, live life there. I'm trying to kind of figure out all the different groups in Rotterdam and connect with people and work with my community and stuff like that.
Nice. How do you relate to squatting, and how did you get into squatting in the first place?
Right. So I've been politically active for quite some years now.
Mm-hmm.
It always started with anarchism since I was quite young. And squatting has always been kind of this thing very close to anarchism. And for a long time I didn't do it, but I always wanted to. And I started going around a few countries and meeting people and discovering people and spaces and communities. And I found one here in Rotterdam. And after spending some time with them and working with them, they asked me to come join them, to squat with them. And I did. And since then, I've, been through a tour of quite some squats and opened a few and lived in a few. Yeah.
What is it to open a squat? Like,
well, it means the practical action of, you find a place, you check out what kind of locks it needs, you get the locks, you change it, you occupy, you contact authorities, stuff like that.
And how has it been so far? Because you say that now you joined a quite established squad, I would say. I have a question about how it went actually, because I remember you were closely evicted. But
yes,
how do you reflect on how it's usually going?
Yeah, so I think the first time you open a squad, it's really something magical, because everyone has a very similar experience where it seems really scary, and the hours beforehand you're like shaking and you're worried. You think, oh no, the cops are going to come every moment. But when you're actually there and you're doing it, you realize that it's quite easy actually. And once you're actually inside, you realize, wow, this place is empty, unused, and I can do so much with it. And you really unlock this personal freedom when you do it. And I remember the first time that I did it, I felt so much energy, and I was very anxious but also so excited. And when I actually entered the space, I went up and down the 3-floor building, and I was just giggity, full of ideas and imagination. And it was a lovely experience.
Nice.
Yeah.
What do you get from squatting? Why do you do it for?
Yeah, I think the most lovely part about squatting is that it really opens yourself up to imagination, but also your own freedom. It really is a tool by which you can express your own freedom and really grab it for yourself. It's something that you choose to do, and it's something that very directly gives you a space to be in. It gives you the freedom of options, of choices, and it's one step in the process of mentally freeing yourself and not following existing power structures. And it's, in my opinion, is one of the most effective ways of doing it.
Okay, exciting. Actually, I asked you to send me a track that reminds you of squatting somehow,
yes,
or that is part of your community or part of a community. So we're going to listen to it, and then we're going to discuss why you sent it to me.
Lovely.
Huisje leeg, geen hond te bekennen. Bij de deur ligt een stapel met post. Er zitten planken voor de ramen. Heb je enig idee hoeveel zo'n huisje kost? Een koevoet is een handig ding. Een koevoet is een handig ding. Een koevoet is een handig week of zo. Maar de huur blijft stijgen, de woningmarkt is fucked up. Dus pak je koevoet maar, dan kraken we een pandje en knappen we de boel weer op. Een koevoet is een handig ding. 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 We hebben onderdak, een boompje en een beestje, een jointje en een lauwe klok. De buren die zijn blij, de deur staat altijd open en de eigenaar die geeft geen fok. Nee, nee, een koevoet is een handig ding. 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 Een koevoet is een handig ding.
So that was Koevoet from Femini Vloei, maybe the
Yes.
other way around. So why did you pick this track?
Yeah, so there's an obvious reason, which is that the song is about squatting. But the more underlying reason is because, first of all, it's a song by people in our community. They're squatters, they're friends of ours, they're really nice people. But also it's a song that gets, sang and played in events that we often do. And I mean, in a very broad way. I was, for example, once in Groningen in an anarchist camp. And one of the people was there by coincidence. And my friends were like, oh, look, it's that one person. And someone gave them a guitar and said, oh, play a song. And then they started playing a song from this album. And then everyone was joining in. And then you had 100 anarchists at this huge camp. They were all, dancing really hard to this song. And I can sing it in a lot of spaces here and people will all join in and love it. And so the real reason I chose it is it really represents this community aspect of squatting and anarchism and being active and stuff. And it's a very communal experience. And this is also the song that I was playing when I was in the truck of some crusty anarchists going to move to Rotterdam. And they played this and it was my introduction a bit to the city. And so it's also a really nice personal memory for me.
Yeah, I understand. Is music a big part of the Catu community? Or?
I mean, there's a lot of people who really enjoy music, for sure. There's definitely different tendencies, different genres that people like to stick to. But in general, it's also a very bonding experience because we live with a lot of people there, people from very different backgrounds and who are interested in different things. But when we're in the living room and there's songs playing that we like, it's a very nice way to come together and to link up and to just have fun together. Definitely.
Do you think about music as a political act in this sense?
Yes, I think that music has a very unique way of bringing you a certain mindset and feeling. And in this way, it's very necessary for politics because you can't do politically active stuff if you don't have, a belief in something or if you don't have this passion for something. And music is an amazing way to lighten up that passion, to really give you a drive. That's why that punk is such a big part of anarchism. When you play a punk song, you can hear your ideals, you can hear the passion in someone's voice, and it really animates you to want to go do stuff. So I think it's really important in that sense.
Yeah, it's nice that you say this because during the previous episode with Do It Self Workplace, we discussed about why punk was such a prominent genre within the anarchist or free scene. Because, for instance, the way I listen to political music is mostly through hip hop and black and brown music. And then I realized, of course, punk is also a big chunk of political material when it comes to music. So, nice. It's a nice addition. Actually, I was wondering, what is a day in a squat like?
A day in a squat.
Can you walk us through? I don't know, like when you wake up till the end of the day, how is it like?
Yeah, well, so first of all, we're all people who really enjoy freedom, right? So you kind of, you choose how you want to participate in what and how and what kind of life you build there. I have my own room. I set it up in a certain way. I have a certain rhythm. For me, I wake up a bit late. I like to sleep in, and then, for example, we might make a breakfast together with a few people for the other people that are still sleeping or whatever. We might use some skip from last night, so some food that we got from a dumpster that we cleaned. We might, plan our activities for the day that we might go to, for example, help defend the squad somewhere or participate in a protest maybe or something like this. And I think the most fun part about it is there's a million things that happen throughout the day which are never planned, which are spontaneous, and which you can just latch on to however you want. For example, people might have an idea to organize something, or people might start grabbing foam swords and, hitting each other with it, or people start making music maybe, or people invite a hairdresser and everyone gets, a weird haircut, or people make some patches, or, there's a million things that can happen. And because everyone is kind of their, they have these things they focus on, these interests they have, they kind of bring it together, we kind of share in them. And so a bunch of things happen throughout the day that you don't plan, but which end up, you learn something, or you participate in something new, or you join someone, and it's always chaos and pure randomness. But you can also choose, do you want to participate? Do you not want to? Do you want to do something yourself? Do you want to be alone? And so every day is completely different and full of interesting things to do, and it's very energizing.
What is the most energizing thing for you in the squad?
The most energizing thing is for sure when me and my friends try and organize an event, something we find important that we want to share, or something, like a fundraising for something, whatever. And then seeing, sometimes 50, 60 people come, and then seeing all these people from all kinds of walks of life that are interested in this idea, and talking to them about, why they came all this way to the squad that they don't know to hear about this idea. And hearing the interest and the passion in people, and hearing their own ideas. And, when we tell them we want more people to use the space, we want everyone to give us ideas, to hear them come up with things they want to do. That's really the most energizing thing, is hearing other people express their own will and freedom and ideas.
I don't know how much you can disclose, but do you have examples of people that you would never expect to be here?
Well,
I remember the other day I spoke with somebody I know who is also a bit in the scene, and they explained that sometimes you have bankers that just come, or people that used to have a steady job and suddenly they just end up participating in squats. And for me, before we turned the mic on, I was explaining about my assumptions, and I was like, oh really, you mean also these people come? And I mean, of course you never know, but paths of lives. But do you have any surprising profiles that ended up joining the Catu or any other community?
Yeah, well, I think the most interesting one is on one hand you have community events, which are for the area around us, so people specifically from the neighborhood. And to me it's surprising, because it's always people who are just average Joes. They're not people who are part of a specific hardcore scene, or who are spending their life doing politics. They're just, regular person on with a day job who just comes over, and then seeing this person want to go to this space where, there's a bunch of anarchist flags and, Kurdish flags and all these propaganda posters and all this stuff, and that they enjoy being in the space. They want to help and contribute. To me, that's always the most wonderful thing to see. And it's always surprising to see, sometimes you almost get the feeling, because of how closed off the scene sometimes is, that you have to have a certain background, a certain knowing about what anarchism is or whatever to get there. But that's something that we also don't want at all. We don't want it to become such a stratified thing. We want everyone to come and feel comfortable coming. And so sometimes I see these average people come here that adore the space, even though they came here through a different way than I did. And it's lovely seeing that we can still both end up there, even though we have different ways to get there. And on the other hand, there's also sometimes people come with requests they don't expect. This podcast, for example, was a random request that we love to see. But also sometimes, there's master students in Berlin who come to Rotterdam for a day, and then they say, oh, I want to, think about how to design anarchist architecture of you guys or whatever. And those are also really fun to have.
Yeah, that's super sick, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would be curious to see anarchist architecture.
Yeah.
Are you into the field a bit, or like
Into architecture or?
I mean, yeah, like a design practice, or
A little bit. I'm mainly into philosophy, and via that a bit more into like flows of architecture, like how it's aesthetically done, but not very in depth. No.
okay. So, because my question would be, do you feel that squatting is influencing your practice as a maker, or the way you think about life, or?
Yes, 100%. Like I pointed to earlier, squatting really opens your mind, right? So before I lived here, I lived in Belgium, and I had a small group of friends who we all had the same anarchist ideals, and we tried working with those, but we weren't squatting, and we didn't have really the opportunity to have a space where you could build out of, and so we were quite limited in what we could do. We tried a lot of things, and I'm not saying squatting is necessary, but for me personally, it's the type of thing I was looking for, but I couldn't, make happen. But then once I moved here, suddenly all these ideas I've had for years were just doable. I realized I have the space, there's a platform, there's people to help, there's community, and realizing that I have all these things now that I live in a squat really helped me to make my dream projects come true. And for example, soon in I think 2 weeks, we're doing a philosophy event at Catu that I'm organizing, and it's something I never thought anyone would care about at all, because it's a hyper-specific niche part of philosophy that I'm doing for myself basically. But then people were interested in it, and now it's like this is all I could ever dream about doing. Talking about what I love with other people who are interested. It's a dream.
I actually didn't think about this question when preparing the podcast, but it just comes to my mind now that you speak about anarchism a lot. In where I'm from, in France, at least, when you speak about anarchists, you have this. I think the mainstream image that comes to mind is, I don't know, maybe like troublemaker punk or something. When, in my experience, or at least from how I understand it, it's way broader than this. I mean, there are potentially even anarchisms with an S. How would you explain what it is in simple words to somebody who is completely, I wouldn't say out of the league, but like out of the community, or doesn't know what it is actually?
Yeah. To me, it's relatively simple. Anarchism to me means that you want freedom for everyone as much as possible. With an emphasis on everyone, and you try to do what you can to build the world towards that. And I fully agree with what you say, that there's multiple anarchisms. I have a very specific idea of how my anarchism works, but every roommate I have in my squad is a different one. But we all work together very easily. I think that anarchism fundamentally is just trying to live in a way that aligns with liking freedom and wanting other people to also be free.
How does that work practically in your community at Catu, for instance? Because also not being part of it, because I mean, I visited squats, but mainly as a guest for events. How do you cope with the fact that sometimes you have different visions over, I don't know how about politics precisely, but also how the space should be run or what kind of events to organize? I guess there is always a bit of flexibility, but is there also potential struggles or friction sometimes?
Yeah, so me as an anarchist and my whole household, I think most anarchists agree, we love difference. Difference is identity and is your freedom. And so there's not often conflict about this in my experience in Catu, because we all just accept our differences and there's no problem with it. If we want to do something else, then we do something else. If someone has an established event that we don't agree with, we just don't participate. If we do like it, we participate. It's really quite simple, really. Mm-hmm. If you don't like it, you don't have to work on it. You can do your own thing. If you say, oh, I think it would be better if we did it like this, then go for it. Do your own thing. People might join, people might help. It's very flexible. And in terms of like running the house and stuff, we have house meetings and we kind of talk, and we all have this this reflex to want to self-critique and to want to, know that just because I want something in some way doesn't mean it has to happen, doesn't mean I have to drag other people down for it. I find a way to make it work, and we all deal with like conflict resolution, right? We all like each other. We're all friends. We don't want to cause problems, and we all are okay with there being differences. So it works out quite easily, actually.
Oh, that's nice to hear. Speaking about community and specifically organizing events and being part of a neighborhood, how are your relationship with the neighbors precisely? How is your community seen by the neighbors?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one of the most the focus points of why we squat at Catu and what we're trying to do there. So, for example, we recently had an open assembly. We put some posters around that said, doors are open, please, people from neighborhood come, and we want to discuss how you can use a space, because fundamentally that's always been our goal. We want Catu to be a place where we live, but then there's also a separate communal space where we want people to host events and use the space for themselves. And so, people came and they gave ideas, like people want to do like a people's kitchen, people want to organize like a daycare, people want to, there's a library there, people want to organize events, all types of stuff. And we really love hearing, people community come and talk about them, but we're also learning how to do it better. For example, like our events are on Radar Squat, which is a website where you can find a lot of, squatting events.
Yep.
But that's not a site that everyone knows, or not even a lot of people know. And so we're trying to still learn how to get it out there. But at the moment, we are in contact with a lot of people in the community in our neighborhood, and we are trying to get more people involved and to use our space.
Okay, well, that sounds nice.
Yeah.
I mentioned it earlier, but maybe I'm wrong. I believe that the squad has was almost evicted at some point.
Yes,
but not anymore. You managed to say. How was what happened basically, and what has become your status now?
Normally, what happens then is you get a court case, and it might take a few weeks or months. You show up or you don't, and then whatever. But in our case, there's animals like bats in the school, and the municipality has to have a house for them and has to have like a permit to get them out of there and all this stuff. And getting all of this paperwork takes a long time, takes months and months and months. And so we're at that point now where before they can kick us out, they would have to still do all this. And mind you, this building has been empty for years and years and years. The only plans that there are to demolish it, which there have been for years, but the municipality didn't even care to do that. So, this place has been derelict. And now that we're there, they're like, oh, right, the plans. So, it's kind of a case of there's this place that was empty, and then we tried to come to make a nice thing out of it, and it's working. The community, the neighborhood is all coming to do stuff, and now the municipality is trying to delete that for no obvious reason. They just want us out, but because of the legal reasons, they can't right now.
Saved by bats.
Yes, yeah,
Find it amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. Specifically, precisely, how do you reflect on this whole absurdity of? It's been empty for ages, but now you're in there and it's illegal. So now finally we have plans.
Yeah,
when we never had.
Yeah, well, it's a very obvious example of the state trying to enforce its demands just for the sake of it. It really makes it more obvious that the state is just an organization, one of the most powerful ones, but eventually all it wants is to look powerful, and it wants to control, and that often at the expense of people, right? There's no obvious reason at all why we should be kicked out of this place, which before was empty, later is going to just be, demolished, and now is being used as a lively hub for community events and all types of organizations. It doesn't make sense, and it really just reflects how the state as an institution doesn't have your best interest at heart, and just eventually, the fundamental thing for it is to keep going, to survive, to project its power. And I think, in squatting in general, you see this all the time, and it really solidifies the idea that you can tell the state is just a group that also wants power. It's not something that's there to always protect you or to care for you.
Why do you think there is such a intensification of this criminalization of squats in the recent years? I think the squatting ban was like 2010 or something.
Yes.
meanwhile, or while the situation is also very different, like the housing situation is very different from, at least in the Netherlands, from 30 years ago, right?
Yes.
40 years ago. Why do you think there is such a phenomenon these years?
Yeah. Well, I think it was one of the reports of the like state service, like security services, which said that squatting in leftism is one of the biggest threats to like the institutions of capital and states in this country. And the reason is because squatting is relatively easy, despite the fact that it seems very hard. And I'm not saying, it's very easy, but I do think most people can do it. If people realize this, with the thousands and thousands of empty buildings in Rotterdam and all around Netherlands, people realize this, they start actually doing it. They start creating all these liberated spaces where they can, do what they want and not what some company or state wants them to do. And this is a very slippery slope where, the state doesn't want people's freedom in that sense. And if people do find it and enact it, they go against the state, and the state doesn't like that. The state knows that, for example, in Amsterdam, there's so many squats everywhere. The state can't close them all. It's not strong enough to do that. And squatting is, something so grassroots. You just a group of friends that takes over a building and then uses it for themselves. It's something that so many people can do, that it can really start becoming this whole movement on its own, which it has. That's what Netherlands has experienced. And the housing crisis now makes it so much more necessary for people that, because of the state of neoliberalism in the Netherlands that the government is helping create, people who otherwise would not have gone into squatting are forced to, which just points to the complete failure of the state to help people, to care for them, to give them housing, right? And so I think the reason why squatting is being attacked now is because it's so powerful and because it's growing and because a lot more people are getting into it and realizing the benefits of it.
Do you feel like, as part of the Catu community, you have a role model a bit in this regard? I mean, what I mean is, for example, when you have people from the neighborhood coming, is it something that you organize debates about or around, or is it something that you discuss also in the community? How do you feel you could, or what do you feel your role could be in fighting, gentrification and speculation over real estate and so on?
Yeah. So we don't want to convince people of a certain way of thinking, right? We're not here to just get people converted or whatever. What we really just want is, as I said in the beginning, as much freedom to as many people as possible. And so for us, that means, among other things, that people from our neighborhood can come and do things that they want to do, that they can get their own sense of freedom and take control, and oh, sorry, what was your question again? I forgot.
If squats can become like role models, or if you discuss this kind of stuff with the public.
So when we open up a space and we liberate it and we invite people over, what we want is that people can have the opportunity to for themselves experience this and maybe also start doing it for themselves. So we don't want to be a kind of vanguard or anything. All we want is to help other people achieve their ideals in a way that allows for freedom for everyone. That's why People's Kitchens, for example, are such a lovely example. It's people coming together because they want to help people and making really cheap or free food for people who are starving. We hope that with squatting we can give people the opportunity to do that more and to realize that they can also do it. But we definitely don't see ourselves as a type of leader in that sense or anything like that. We just want to listen to what people need and help them achieve that.
Do you think squats can bring something to the way cities are organized now?
Yeah,
it can be the question is as wide as it can be.
Yeah, 100% for sure. I think again, a squat is an empty space of potential, right? When you rent a space, you don't have all the potential. When you rent, for example, you live there, so that's really you live there with certain codes, with certain problems, with certain things you can and can't do. It's not easy to host a 30-person event in your small apartment that costs so much money that you can't afford to eat anymore. When you have a squat, it's a space that is pure potential. Anything can happen there. You choose what you want to do with it. And in that sense, a squad is not just a single building, but is an idea that can spread. People can open these spaces because there's so many in Rotterdam. And like I said, the actual squatting itself isn't as hard as I think a lot of people think it is. And so in that sense, a squat is an idea that can bring anyone their freedom and boost their imagination and make them achieve what they want to create.
Why do you think? Because you say that, you know, there are a lot of empty spaces and that it's easy to do. Why do you think it's not more the case?
Well, for me, for example, I when I lived in a different place, I didn't do it because people around me weren't doing it. I didn't know, you know, how does it go? What tends to happen? What's the vibe? How dangerous is it? Once you're actually around people who do it, you can tell that, oh, it's actually a lot easier than I thought. And it's I think very, you know, understandable that if you just are listening to this, for example, and you never squat, you don't know people who squat, it's like a far off thing, and it is scary, and it is, you know, a lot of things to learn and whatever. But if, for example, I know a lot of just a random example, art students, I met a lot of them who are vaguely connected in some sense to the squatting circle in the city because people are just friends of friends, and a lot of young people squat. And I've heard of so many cases of, you know a friend who does it, you talk to them, they kind of tell you about it, they help you out, you have struggle finding housing, and then eventually they help you squat something, and then you get into it and you learn it, and then you can do the same thing. And so I think it's really a case of just other people doing it and having community where that happens. You know, it's really hard to squat when there's no one else and when there's no information to be shared. That's why things like the squatting speaking hour at Worm, I think are really useful because they help people, you know, find this.
How does it work actually, if you know?
Do you mean squatting or?
The spreekuur.
Yeah, so basically squatters show up and it's like an open event, and they explain like how to do it, but they also just talk with people to help them with their situation, their housing situation. It's basically just sharing information with each other to try and help people out when they say, hey, I'm interested in how this could go. Basically creating that link between community and people who might want to try and squat.
I have a how can I say, I don't know how I can phrase this question. Do you think in an ideal world squats would disappear, or the opposite, that it would be the major like way of living?
I think if you see squats the way I do, which is just a zone of potential, that in the ideal setting, everything would be a squat. But I mean that in the broadest sense possible, right? The ideal would be everyone is free and people work together with freedom, you know? And if that's the case, then basically the whole world would be like kind of what we try and do in Catu, but then for everyone's own version, right? And that would mean that people have the potential to do what they want and to, you know, all their projects they want to do, all these creative ideas they have, that they could do it everywhere because there wouldn't be some state or company or money limiting them to say, no, you can't do this because of this law or because you don't make enough money or whatever else. The point would be you can do what you want and you can create the world you want.
Sounds promising.
Yeah.
Was there a major challenge you had to face at Catu in the from your experience? It could be when the community had to face a major challenge besides being almost evicted by the police.
Well, Catu is like a social squad, right? Which means that it's to a certain extent public. It's something you can find information about. You can come and organize stuff, which is very different to most squats. Most squats, people just live in there and they don't open it up in any way because they stay fully private. But as a social squad, Catu has some more unique issues with it. For example, there's always the problem, the possibility of bad actors, right? Since it's public, people can come visit with bad intentions. And at the same time, when you're more known, the local political groups also know about you. And for example, some political groups have sent us very nice postcards, while others debate in the municipality saying, "Oh, why aren't they gone yet?" So you're more of a target when you're this open, but it's also a source of strength. It means that we can open up to the community, and it means that we can also have all these people, because there's hundreds of people connected to Catu in some sense, which can help us, and which we can come together to do mutual aid and defend each other and so on. More personally speaking, it's more intense than a normal squad because there's so much going on. There's so many things being organized, and there's lots to be done. But that's also, again, part of the joy of it. There's so much going on, and there's a lot you can do, and you can really feel that you can finally start doing what you always wanted to do.
Sounds cool.
Yeah.
How does one sustain a community like this? Because you just mentioned that sometimes you become a target, or that there are risks of being too open or doing something that is officially illegal, so you also become the target of public institutions. How do you one could say like regenerate, or how do you sustain the community like this?
Yeah. So
how do you move forward, I would say?
Yeah, there's two parts of that. One is a more personal part where you have to know for yourself what your limits are and what you need, and to ask when you need something or to take space when you need it. If you get burnt out, you're not helping yourself or anyone else, right? So you have to take care of yourself and know what you need so that you don't burn out, so that you don't, get too anxious, that you don't worry about all these things. But in the broader sense, in the community sense, what we're trying to do is show that a different world is possible, right? You don't have to stick by, capitalism and by state laws and all these things. We are actively in this space trying to show a tiny example, just a tiny amount of what it could be like. And in doing this, what we're trying to do is build alternative to everything, alternative to community care, to helping each other out, to defense, to, creating stuff. And in this sense, every aspect of what you mentioned is something that we're building towards. We're trying to help each other by, for example, focusing on listening to each other, trying to resolve conflicts mutually, trying to, for example, not let cops do stuff that they're not allowed to do. The point is that we try to create a new world which allows for each other's freedom and care, and we try and enforce. We try and work on this in every way that we can.
What you just said about cops not doing illegal stuff, led me thinking. Do you have like law literacy, or like things that you like you just teach each other what is allowed and what is not? But then I was thinking, are there specific, I wouldn't say rules, because you kind of stress the fact that you like organize a community more about principles than solid rules.
Yes.
But what would be something that you do differently from society, or I don't know how to explain, but like how things are established now? What are guiding principles besides freedom for everyone that stick your community together? I don't know if it's a nicely phrased, but that's the point.
Yeah. Well, for example, the people who live in Catu, we all know each other well, right? We're all friends, and this allows a different level of collaboration than something more formal. So, for example, there are no solid rules, as you said. We all know each other. We can all talk to each other. We all know roughly, very vaguely, what we all want and how we work, which means that we can work very fluidly and dynamically and with each other. When you have a more formal system, you have to obey certain laws, no matter if they, align with your values or how you are or not. You always have to listen to a leader. In our case, that would never work at all. The only reason we're able to do this is because we work on principles of, listen to each other, try and help each other out. Don't try and, have your ego rule everything and so on. And these aren't explicit, solid rules. These are just principles that we all try and live by, which we anyway try and do in all facets of our life. And in Catu, you can see them very clearly how, how conflicts are resolved. For example, we just talk together and we have good intentions and things work out. It honestly comes quite natural after some time.
Yeah, I was precisely thinking, how do you handle conflict? Because that's conversations I have a lot with friends when, you imagine a world without the police or without laws. And you're like, there are a few principles that we have to stick around, right?
Yeah.
Because Otherwise, it's just going to become a mess, and you
Mhm.
need those infrastructures to fix problems sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you manage to do it in a healthy way, I guess it's mission accomplished.
Yeah,
Right?
for sure.
I think we have roughly 15 minutes left. So I would like to this last part of the show to be around hope. And you sent me a track
Mhm.
that you would like that represents hope for you. So we're going to listen to it and discuss it afterwards.
There were those who didn't run. There were those who couldn't take it. There were those who stayed in the city. What was it? Where did it go? There were those who laid their bodies down. There were those who took out knives. There were those who kissed the gray skies. There were those who knew only the sound of their own voices. There were those who knew the rules. There were those who freed their bodies. There were those who couldn't take it. There were others on their own. What was it? What was it? There were strangers and con men. There were those who lived in the crawl space. There were people lighting candles. There were people going crazy. There were those who walked the beach. What war is that? What town could this be? There were those who didn't run. There were those who couldn't take it. There were those who stayed in the city. What was it? Where did it go? There were those who laid their bodies down. There were those who took out knives. There were those who kissed the gray skies. There were those who knew only the sound of their own voices. There were those who knew the rules. There were those who freed their bodies. There were those who couldn't take it. There were others on their own. What was it? What was it? There were strangers and con men. There were those who lived in the crawl space. There were people lighting candles. There were people going crazy. There were those who walked the beach. What war was that? What war was that? What town could this be?
Wow, nice ending.
Yeah.
I didn't get that it was ending like this, like very ASMR type thing. It's very nice, cool track. So, why did you pick this one for hope?
Yeah. So what I love about this song, apart from the sound of it, is that it talks about this thing that happens, and it says the consequence of it. So it just says, what happened, what was it, and you hear about all these different, snapshots. There are those that couldn't take it. There are those who lit up candles, and at certain point also says, I think, there are those who knew the rules and those who freed their bodies, which I think is, you can very easily use that to talk about what we're talking about. But what I love about it is it's kind of like this speculative fiction type thing where it's describing this situation about specifics and you fill in the blanks. But the interesting thing to me and the hopeful thing to me is that you have all these different snapshots, and some of them are ones that I align with, and to me, this is about an apocalypse or something, right? And then the free your body line, for example, is something that I resonate with, where I see this as, these are your options, which one will you go for? Which one do you want to work towards? And to me, that's what I want to work towards is the freeing of my body, right? Is no matter what happens, I want to work towards my ideals and what I want.
And I don't really know how to phrase this question, but you just mentioned fiction.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I am concerned, it's often a way for me to access certain forms of utopias, I would say. I mean, there are a couple of French writers that I really like to read these days. One of them is Alain Damasio, and he's kind of a superstar in the activist scene, I would say, because he envisions spaces that are pretty much freed from the establishment, and confronting people that just use parachutes over buildings to avoid places that have been locked down by technology and stuff like that. My point is, do you think fiction could be a tool for squats to kind of spread their message or their goals or their lifestyle?
100%. The last squad I lived in, we actually were doing this. We were working with some art students here, and the topic was speculative fiction, which is, what you're saying, this fiction where you try and imagine a new world. And we were actively trying to see how can we use that to try and open our imaginations up, with the goal of, if you can imagine how it could be, maybe you actually can then find a way to go for it. And squats to me are just the literal example of this. You want a world where people don't have to skip meals so they can afford to live in a place with a roof, and so you create that. You open a space up, and what used to be just this pile of rotting brick becomes this zone of potential. And so I think it's fully possible. It's also, to me, linked to this famous line of, it's easier to imagine the end of capitalism than the end of the world and the end of capitalism.
Yeah.
Which I fully, I feel that way. Even though I'm doing all this, sometimes it's easier to imagine climate change destroying the world than that we change our system. And that's, for me, all the more motivation to try and change the system, right? Because I know it's possible, because I squat and I can create a different world. So I want to find ways to keep finding alternatives.
How much room is there in the squat daily life to imagine those potentialities, to think about the future and, if we're doing well, potentially in X amount of time, we'll reach this goal?
Yeah.
How do you relate to this?
That's a great question. To me, that is something that I'm daily aware of, is how lucky I feel to be there, because I see so much more potential now, and because this living here is like everyday practicing this creative task, right? Even if you get into a certain flow at Catu, there's so much potential begging for you to create that you're constantly challenged to change your mind and to imagine and to create and to really see, like, what do I want and how do I do this? Because I think also something that gets opened up when you live in a place like this is taking initiative and doing things. I think in our day-to-day life, it's very easy to fall into a rhythm, especially when you have your work that you have to go to, you have bills you have to pay, all this stuff. You have to spend hours cooking, transport, all this. It's, I think, partially on purpose, very easy to get stuck in it, and it's very hard to get out of because there's so much pressure against you. But when you live in a place like this, you free up this possibility for you to choose how you live, to really choose. Even though there's all these things at Catu, eventually, like, if you can really choose how you want to live your daily life. You don't have to spend all day doing these events and this and that. And this allows you to have like a blank canvas where you say, okay, what do I really want? And it may seem like an obvious question, but it's a really tough one to answer. How do you, when you have the potential, actually build what you want? How do you start working out of something that's pure imagination? I don't even know everything I want. But living there helps me get towards that question and really build towards it.
Nice. Energizing speech, I would say. What would you say to people that think that squats are some sort of utopias? Or maybe at large, people that say that anarchism is a utopia?
I would say that something that's not unique to anarchism, but that in my experience here, anarchism does a lot of, is practice what it preaches, right? It's more about really living what you want as far as is possible, more than trying to spread a utopia, I think. Squatting is not ideal, right? Like when we first moved to our squat, we didn't have a shower. We had to build one. That's not something that people all want to do. But the point is that in this imperfect world we live in, a very imperfect world, you can try and build towards a utopia. And I think it's important that utopia is never achieved. It's important to remember this. Utopia is a constant process that should motivate you. But you should never think that there's a point where it's done or that you're working to a very clear goal. There is no goal. The goal is just freedom, and that's the most vague thing you can possibly say, right?
Yeah.
There is no end point. There's nothing to achieve. There's just building towards what you want most. And so it's a constant process. And squats, for me personally, then are a way to really embody this. You know, you're not just talking about it, you're actively trying to live it. And so in that sense, I think squats are, in one sense, not at all utopia, but in another way, they're trying to guide you towards a better world.
What would you say to somebody who is kind of in between places? My point is somebody who is part of both worlds in a way. That also applies to me, actually. So what would you tell? What is a motivation you would bring, or an argument for or against, or because in my point of view, when I hear you describe this, I'm also like, yeah, it sounds ideal, but there is also like the deal of struggle. So, yeah, what would you say?
Yeah, well, I would say to first look at what you really want, right, and then to see in your current situation how can you get there. You know, what can you do to get what you really want, and often in everyday life, you know, not squatting in a place like Rotterdam, you can work towards it in some ways, but you're always going to find these roadblocks. And so then I asked, you know, these people, if you didn't have those roadblocks, if you really had the potential, what would you do? And often it's a question that, like I said, for me also, like I don't have an obvious answer. And I think that focusing on that is important to see, like, I'm kind of used to being in this flow every day, and this, you know, squatting and all this stuff sounds cool, but what does it really mean for me? I think if you start asking yourself the question of, if you really could, what would you do? You know, if you had the freedom, if you could actually choose any life you wanted, what would you do? I'd say the fact that it's hard to answer that points to a lot about our role in society, and that squats are a way to open that up more, to maybe find out for yourself more what you want. And it's not always easy, but I can promise everyone that when you actually do it, the freedom and the passion and imagination you discover is something that will change you for the rest of your life, and that will, even if you stop squatting for 50 years, you'll always carry it in you in everything you do. You're going to try and find that freedom and that imagination more and more.
Nice. If somebody should hire you or something. Maybe your last question would be, what brings you hope overall?
Me personally,
yeah,
I'm someone who I really believe in this nihilistic idea of the least hopeful thing is having hope. I think that when there is a solid utopia or all talk of hope, that can often work as a smokescreen against building towards what would be your goal of hope, which is, you know, an ideal world. I personally found that the most energizing and the most creative possibility for me is not to have hope, but to just build regardless of hope. For example, if you know, when I sometimes talk to people about what I'm doing, they often say, oh, but, you know, the cops are just going to break it down, or, you know, you're going to get problems with money or legality or whatever. And those problems exist, but I don't do stuff because I think, you know, tomorrow the world's going to be cured or whatever. I do them just for the sake of doing them. It's in the act of working towards what I want to have that I find my freedom and passion. There's no end goal, like I said, right? I'm not doing all this stuff just so I can hope to finish and have a utopia be achieved. I do things for the act itself, and that's regardless of if I think they succeed or not, because that way it can never be killed. My will for freedom can never die down in a prison, underground, wherever. It's always going to be there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Inspiring. Yeah. How can we reach out to the community, or is there maybe one or a couple events that we should look forward to? How can we reach out to the community?
So the most best way I'd recommend is Radar Squad. You can just Google it, and then there's a list of cities and countries, and you can find Rotterdam there, and then you can click on our squad.
The squad radar. Right?
Yes, Radar Squad. I think it's the official site. Yeah,
one or the other.
Yeah, one of those. And then you can click on our squad. You see where it is. You can see a calendar of all our events. We have weekly events. We have like a repair cafe. We can come and bring your technology or your bike or whatever, and we try and fix it up. And you have anarchist library hours, which is just like the library opens and there's all types of books. There's fiction, there's theory, there's whatever. You can just have a chat. And then every so often we have events. There's the philosophy one in 2 weeks, but there's also often we do like fundraisers for people in prison, or surgery for animals. There's going to be the People's Kitchen soon enough. So I'd say every so often check that site, see if something sparks your interest. You can always just come over, ring the doorbell, and have a chat. If I hope that in general people reach out more and give us their ideas for how they want to use the space and how they want to build a better world.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good luck for your event in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. This was lovely.
Of course.
Thanks.